Everyone. On behalf of the Calcutta Research Group, we welcome everyone to the webinar on ecology, security, and sustainability. This is the second webinar this year organized by CRG as part of the research program, Justice, Security, and Vulnerable Populations of South Asia. We welcome Professor Gopa from the University of Burdwan to chair today's session. We welcome the speakers in the panel. Professor Amitesh Mukhopadhyay will be joining us in few minutes. We welcome Dr. Sohini Sengupta from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS, Mumbai, in today's session. And with everyone's permission, we will be recording the session. We now request Professor Samanta to begin the day's proceedings.
Thank you, Shata, for offering me this opportunity to be part of the panel. So I welcome everyone to this panel on ecology, security, and sustainability. We are talking about these things considering that our planetary system of this Earth is facing a severe crisis, and the Earth as a planet, it's like a spaceship. Nothing goes out, nothing comes in. So whatever we have within this planet, we have to make sure the future is sustainable. So that's why we are going to talk about this ecology, security, and sustainability. But the problem is if we try to take these issues separately, then it looks like very simple: ecology, security, and sustainability. But if we treat these three things together, then it is really, really a complicated issue to deal with. And to deal with that, we have two eminent speakers. One is Professor Amitesh Mukhopadhyay and Dr. Sohini Sengupta, who is speaking on these issues. So as Amitesh is not present, so I would request Sohini to start her deliberation. And you have 30 minutes for your deliberation, Sohini. Is that okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Gopa Samanta, and thank you, CRG colleagues, Professor Shamatar, Shatabdi, and the Calcutta Research Group. I have been asked to speak on this really important subject, which is the connection between ecology, security, and sustainability. I thought a lot about where to begin, and I think first I'm going to start with the concept of ecology. And although I'm not an ecologist, I take great interest in all kinds of natural things, which is part of the environment, which all human beings, including us, we inhabit. And one of the questions that we often face nowadays, and in popular discourse, you hear it often spoken, is that our relationship, human relationship with the environment has been going bad, and it's going bad in a really critical way. Human action on the environment has been disastrous or sometimes even catastrophic. And over a period of time, it has reached us to a situation that we are afraid of the fact that the planet itself might become uninhabitable. So the questions like planetary collapse, what happens to then all living communities, not just human beings, are something that, if once upon a time it was the concern of scientists, nowadays it is the concern of almost every college graduates, or even people who have never been to universities. So, especially with the discourses such as climate change and global warming, changing weather patterns, the frequent crisis that we observe and we can experience, including heavy rainfall, excessively hot summers, flooding of our streets, the diseases to which we are subject, the diseases to which our loved ones have perished. When we think about all of these things, it's almost as though our fraught relationship with the environment has literally come home. Now, this feeling and these fears that human beings have a disruptive and catastrophic impact on their natural habitat is something that worries ecologists a lot. Now, for ecologists, the search for what constitutes environmental systems, what constitutes the stability of environmental systems, what keeps biological and organic communities together are key questions that they have researched for a very long period of time. Within many other disciplinary pursuits of knowledge, ecology likes to locate itself as a type of natural science, although not like chemistry or physics, because they have not been able to obtain law-like precisions. They have not been able to predict how the natural environment behaves in law-like manner, not to the precision that perhaps physicists and chemists can do. But they have tried, and in their own way, the discipline to which they have moved closer and closer is actually mathematics. So ecologists often use mathematical models to try and predict how the environment is and how the environment is going to be, and what is the role of different species, what kind of roles do they play in this. Now, three concepts that are derived from the investigations of ecologists and their debates and their concerns are, I'll mention these three concepts. One is, of course, it's the concept of stability. Are the environmental systems stable? And if they're not stable, are they becoming unstable? And if they're becoming unstable, how do we make sure that we restore stability? So restoration, conservation, these are the two important aspects of ecology. Ecologists are very concerned with both restoration as well as conservation. Now, the moment we talk about restoration and conservation, the problem arises because these have practical implications. If you want to conserve some aspects of the natural environment, which parts should be conserved, and which parts should be left to the instability? If we talk about restoration, to what extent and to what historical or what geological timescale do we want to restore the environment? How was the natural world once? And is it practical to restore it to its original place, wherever it was? But these are concerns that that ecologists often talk about. But since ecology as a science is definitely located in the framework of mathematical models, they are they have a slightly difficult relationship with the other kinds of philosophical preoccupations, which is essentially ethics. If scientific knowledge is all about establishing facts or empirical reality or truth or mathematical approximations of reality, then how does this kind of a knowledge system, or this kind of a knowledge production system relate itself or even have conversations with the more ethical concerns which human beings and others have about environment? Because ethical concerns about the environments would also be how the environment or the natural world is being used by multiple species. Of how do we feel about it? How our attitudes towards it is changing? So all forms of restoration, mitigation, protection, and conservation raises lots of ethical concerns, and whenever we talk about ethical concerns, we are moving into perhaps a field which is not so amenable to mathematical approximations. Now, this is where ecology is. Now, in ecology, apart from the concepts like restoration, conservation, and mitigation, you also have concepts like keystone species, and species that are holding the planet together. If they disappear, the planet will also disappear, and so you need to protect them, and such things. Now, from such scientific discussions and concerns that ecologists are primarily speaking about, we move to this whole notion of security. Now, when we talk again about security, from the point of view of ecologists, they would be concerned with securing the stability of the natural world, or securing the, the intact nature of biological communities. In fact, they would may not actually grant the human beings morally superior or morally pole position within these discussions. For them, human beings would be one species amongst many species, and therefore, from their point of view, what makes the whole thing work together is perhaps not necessarily human security, but security of the uh, ecological system itself. A concept in ecology that I think is very key to which is very key to ethical debates, as well as something that might build a bridge between the scientific discussion in ecology as against the social science discussions about human values and human life, and what kind of life do human beings want to lead, what is their what is their ethical duty or responsibilities towards the natural world. To build a bridge between the two, maybe the concept of invasion is interesting. Ecologists often talk about invasive species, plants and animals and other things which have grown in some part of the world, and which have now come to other parts of the world, and creating problems there for native or indigenous species. Now, this invasive species debate within ecology, I think, is very interesting to see what kind of, ideas that ecologists have brought about in speaking about this concept of invasion. Is invasion in this case has the high moral negative attributes that invasion in, say, human security situations have? In human security context, when we speak about invasion, or when we speak about immigration, when we speak about people who are not like us coming and living in our society, trying to become our friends, crossing group boundaries, trying to marry within the community, we see all of this as very harmful to society. So in the ecological debate, however, whether invasive species are destructive or productive, are they good for the natural world, are they bad for the natural world, is not well established, because invasion here is not does not have a moral, or does not have the kind of charge, the negative charge that invasion in the security context has. So in that sense, picking up this concept of invasive species and the debates around it from ecology perhaps might be a useful instrument to try and understand how human security can be envisaged. Now, the main reason why humans have such a disruptive relationship with the natural world and the environment is because they have been they have been part of, historically, they have been part of this process of conversion. They have been trying to convert different aspects of the natural world into economic value, and then this economically valuable things are translatable into socially valuable things with which they have been constructing meaningful ways of leading their lives. So the questions that underlie the basic question that creates this disruptive relationship between human beings and their natural world is their ability, is their constant striving to create better living conditions for themselves, to lead a more satisfying world. And when they try to create a better living condition for themselves, they obviously use as a model different kinds of the other communities that they have observed. So the striving to lead a better life and the need to convert the natural world into productive things as inevitably leads to a situation in which they develop both a very good understanding and knowledge about eco economically valuable environmental goods and services, and all those environmental aspects which are perhaps not easy to convert into economic value. And as a consequence, the natural environment becomes a particular way because they are constantly constructing it. And here again, there's an important insight from ecology. In ecology, there is this concept called niche. Now, there are two kinds of debates within ecology. Some people believe that the niche is an environmental niche in which different kinds of species have learned to inhabit in a very organic way, and therefore it leads to a very sustainable and a very harmonious relationship. There are other ecologists, however, who believe that the niche is not a given. So the ecological niche is something that organisms actually construct, and therefore it's a much more flexible construct. So niche is not something that is given, that original species and indigenous species actually inhabit, but niche is something that organisms construct as they develop adaptation to the ever-changing natural world. So this niche construct, I feel, is also very interesting and useful to try and perhaps look at human relationships with their natural world, not only in a catastrophic sense, but also in the sense that being part of one of the many organisms that inhabit the natural world, perhaps, and not that they would realize wisdom, but perhaps they will learn to adapt to this ever-changing natural world in ways that are not only about converting bits and pieces of it into economic value, but also learning to relate to the environment in more intuitive, perhaps more moral and more dutiful and more intuitive ways. Now, this is, of course, if they are unable to do so, of course, whether they would be able to sustain their desired living conditions, which is basically to lead a meaningful, satisfying, and flourishing human existence, or whether they are going to be able to cause immense damage and pain and destruction to other natural organisms. I mean, that question is open. No one has really been able to predict it using either natural science or other forms of ethical conceptions. And I will not try to really take a side here that they are agents of destruction, or they're moral and dutiful people who would adapt and mitigate and therefore learn to live far in a far better and a far less productivist way with the environment. Okay, so how am I doing with time? Do I have about
Yes.
7-8 minutes?
Yes,
5
yes.
minutes?
Yes,
7-8
you
minutes.
have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even
So
15. Yeah. Okay. You
how
can
many?
get up to, yeah, it's you have started at 18:10.
Okay.
So
Okay. Thank
15,
you.
15 minutes you can take, Sohini.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Right. So, okay. So you have the the ecological concept of niche, and you have human beings who are very much invested in leading a good life, and their idea of a good life is increasingly developing more and more application oriented knowledge of their environment, and trying to convert this into a sort of production, and in which they follow models which they have already seen, successful model they're trying and testing, and as a consequence, perhaps they're moving into uncharted realms, which leads to all kinds of disastrous situation. Now, once we have with these concepts in mind, these frameworks in mind, at least the sketchy structure in mind, I want to take 3 examples from 3 different parts of the world, 3 different kinds of what ecologists would probably call 3 ecological situations, 3 different types of habitations. So within our country, we have the mountains, the Himalayas. They are young mountains, and they are changing, and they tend to respond to climatic variations and weather conditions in very dramatic ways. And when they do that, and if we've been following news media this year, they are exacting very heavy toll on human beings who find themselves in the mountains for various purposes, whether they're there for tourism, whether they're for pilgrimage, whether they're there for trekking, or whether they're just ecologists collecting data to create a good database about the Himalayan environment. Now, the the way in which we try and understand the Himalayan society is perhaps there are two ways. I mean, from an ecological point of view and from a security point of view. From a security point of view, of course, it's a very critical border area between different countries in the global south, and these countries are not necessarily always seeing eye to eye. The population and the communities, however, who live across this secure and insecure and highly flexible border, they have continued to retain ties with each other over over hundreds of years, and they're used to moving back and forth. Now there's a contention always across the border about who belongs to which side of the border. So there's a clear security issue, and the Himalayas being a geographical border is no longer sufficient. You also need to juxtapose the geographical border with more militaristic sort of mobilization to ensure that the friendly countries can move across, and people from friendly countries can move across, and the people from unfriendly countries cannot. And that is the security situation there. So very quickly, communities and people who live alongside these borders can find themselves in situations of tremendous insecurity. Now, coupled with that, you also have the young mountains who are behaving quite erratically because of climatic weather and other forms of aberration. So you have landslides, and you have floods, and you have glacial lake outburst flows, and you have productive activities. You have road making, you have tunnel making, you have house construction, you have townships subsiding, and you have mountaineers who are left adrift, and therefore I know that CRG colleagues are coming from Kathmandu. You know how, the mountaineers got, left stranded in Nepal because of unprecedented snowfall and rain in October, which no one anticipated, and they all had to be rescued. So everyone is in some ways, to put it very simply, all these different kinds of communities of human beings who are pursuing, I suppose, some vision of satisfying life, of some vision of meaningful existence, how to build a good life. Their lives are intersecting, and their lives are intersecting in such a fashion that they are seeing direct impact of catastrophic environmental change on which impacts their pursuits. So at some point in time, their paths are crossing, although they live in different places, and not all of them have good escape routes. So that's the situation of the Himalayas. Would people continue to convert, therefore, mountain habitats into usable and economically productive uses? And would they continue to pursue, nevertheless, their very insecure pursuits? Or would they stop and think about how is it that they might learn to perhaps get into some of these thinking about niche construction, restoration, developing a better and more intuitive relationship with the mountain, which does not involve immediate results, immediate products, or immediate benefits. So that's about the mountains. I'm not specifically mentioning any states or any particular disaster that has taken place at this point. The second kind of place, the second kind of locality that I would speak about is, the drier parts of India, the landlocked parts of India where, the most people are still rural, still agricultural, and their entire existence is, to a great extent, still dependent on agriculture. And here, the production of the crops, increasing production of crops, increasing yield, and competing with other farmers, including farmers who live in better endowed region, is increasing. And one of the ways in which people are solving this problem is using technology and digging deeper and deeper, and extracting a lot of groundwater and ensuring that their crop production actually takes place. In this single-minded pursuit of becoming, ensuring that we have buffer stock of food, and ensuring that they continue to produce enough grains to supply the local market, in order to ensure that they have minimum income, they're probably extracting groundwater to the level that is in future would be unsustainable. Now, the questions that one needs to examine here is, how did people because communities have lived in these areas historically for hundreds of years. How did people survive here before? Did they have other meaningful ways of existence which have now been eroded? Is it possible to actually restore or go back to the past? Is it possible to find alternatives, which is moves people away from this track in which through which they are going to create a lot of insecurity for themselves in the coming years? Because once the water dries up, and people may have no option but to go back to leave the place, or go back to other forms of livelihoods, which livelihoods cannot be created overnight. Agriculture has a strong long history, and therefore people can keep farming, but replacing agriculture with something else is not going to be so simple, either economically, socially, or even morally, for people who have always been used to farming. So that's the challenge for dry areas. And then when we look at our urban areas or the cities where a large number of people from these environmentally difficult places come for a variety of reasons, because again, they're attracted by this idea of a good life. The cities are places full of strife. Cities are places full of competition. Cities are also places full of lot of cheer and happiness for young people, places of freedom and autonomy and so on. But these are also places that we have seen in recent years, especially after the pandemic, are very hostile towards those who are not being able to constantly demonstrate their economic worth. And this demonstration of economic worth that makes cities livable. The expense of that is growing constantly. So you might in future require higher and higher and higher incomes to be able to make for yourself a life in a city in which all sorts of protections you would have to subsidize yourself. So you would have to pay for water, you would have to pay for air, you would have to pay for transportation, you would have to pay for medical costs, and if there's pandemic, you'll have to pay for the lockdown. So living in the cities is not simple, and in future only those who would be able to survive here are the ones who are either extremely wealthy, or those sections of the population who are rendered surplus by the economy, who are expected to take upon themselves all kinds of risks, and all kinds of including mortality. You're supposed to take upon yourself all those risks in order to inhabit a place that we call urban areas in the context of India today. So so cities produce remarkable existential challenges, and cities are probably the places from where people go to travel to the mountains and place themselves in another sort of risks in search of a better life. People from the mountains come to the cities because it's hard to live there. People from the landlocked areas come to the cities to earn a living, and so that they can go back and dig the wells with which they can farm. So these are all interconnected lives. But the point here is essentially that I'm trying to say is that eventually, where do I want to take all this discussion? I'm not among those who believe that our solution lies in beating people into believing that they are themselves, by their own actions, destroying their natural worlds and environment. And if they do not realize, and if they don't wake up, the world would be destroyed. I think here environmental pragmatism offers us a way out, in which people can perhaps try to understand that for centuries they have experienced challenges in the natural world, and they have created for themselves a place in the natural world, including by taking on all the risks and responsibilities that it entails, and that in future perhaps they'll be able to do the same, but provided they are being able to relate to their natural environments, not only in empirical and scientific and reductionist ways, although empiricism and science and models, etc., I'm all for it in some ways, because it does produce an approximation of reality which is usable. But at the same time, we need to develop more intuitive understandings of what is it that is working for us and things that are not working for us. And of course, remembering that we are only one organism amongst the biological community is a very good is a good starting point in picking up and taking on some of these moral and ethical responsibilities, to be able to inhabit our natural worlds in ways which are not destructive and not catastrophic. So I think I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohini. Thank you very much for finishing within time. So Amitesh has joined, and now I think we can request Amitesh, Professor Amitesh Mukhopadhyay, for your deliberation, and then we will proceed for the question and comments together.
Okay, thank you, Professor Samanta. My sincere thanks goes to the organizers, the conference, and this webinar. I'm afraid I'm a little all over the place because I've been traveling and going back and forth, which is something why I called Shatabdi today morning, that it could very well be that I might not be here on time and things that already would start. My sincere thanks goes to organizers for this invite and Professor Samanta. I'm continuing with my video on, but the network that I'm using is not very stable. So in case it sort of shows signs and symptoms of instability or something, then I might have to switch it off. I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Once again, thanks very much for inviting to be part of this webinar on sustainable ecology, security, and sustainability, and something for which I think the CRG's concept note very succinctly sort of provides the context. And with this serving as something of a backdrop and taking cue, we could perhaps say that we are actually in the middle of a climate change, and perhaps it would not be sort of an exaggeration to suggest that the present century actually finds itself in the middle of this climate change, and perhaps its ramifications are far more in this part of the world than elsewhere. This particularly the events that we had witnessed in the recent past, in the last few years, for example, the flash flood in Wayanad in 24, even before that in the Sundarbans in 2021, recent flooding in Kolkata, and a number of times that climate disasters that have struck the Himalayan regions, the towns and the villages, and the most recent one in North Bengal, which had claimed lives. Certainly, this certainty of climate change throws us into a perpetual state of uncertainty and leaves us wondering as to how we rethink this relation between ecology, security, and sustainability, and perhaps revisit or think around this question of just transition, which is something that often figures in funded researches that are often they center around ecological and vulnerable hotspots. Just transition to sort of environmental conservation, ecological restoration, which are very significant and crucial concepts in this climate of ecological crisis amidst demands of human life and livelihood. And this question seems significant as much in the Himalayan, mountainous regions where there are settlements, the towns and villages, and also in places like coastal Sundarbans or many other coastal places in the subcontinent. But at the same time, we are also kind of confronted with increasing kind of incommensurable find ourselves into incommensurable situations, incommensurable practices, which could very well be as follows. For example, now these are the regions, for example, the Himalayan regions or say coastal Sundarbans. These are sites where, you have communities who live and communitarian practices abound, practices that might be of relevance to environmental restoration. And yet these are the regions which in recent times have also witnessed development, tourism projects, indiscriminate commercial construction, urban sprawls, which are also viewed as being responsible for repeated environmental climate disasters. We have often come across these acquisitions in the Himalayan regions where environmental catastrophes have often been attributed to the way in which indiscriminate travel tourism industry has unfolded and flourished in these regions. But Sundarban is also not very far behind. If you go to Sundarban in these days, then it's not difficult to find the symptoms of such development holding very perceptibly and also quite strongly make their presence felt. And it is also a lure of livelihood that sucks often the same communities, the local people who are often known for their practices, environmentally induced, sustainability induced practices, which are often reasons why there are researches happening around these communities and their practices. You find them that this lure of livelihood that often sucks them into these flourishing tourism development industries as well. Well, there are environmental acts and rules, something that figured very strongly in CRG's concept note, that there are environmental acts, rules in India, such as joint forest management, community-based tank irrigation management, etc., that encourage people's initiatives and initiatives in environmental restoration. At the same time, the protective forest conservation, something at least with which I'm more familiar when we turn to places like Sundarbans, would often look upon the forested communities, same communities, as intruders. And this is something which figures in the writings of people who have walked on the Sundarbans. For example, Meghna Mehta was walked on these crab collectors and their antics in and around the forest and the waterways of Sundarbans. She's sort of writing and suggesting that on the crab collectors and their alleged contribution to the environmental degradation, she argues that the commercial vessels, trawlers, luxury cruisers, and eroding shoreline went unmarked and hidden in plain sight. Instead, the forest remained, the focus remained on the villainous crab collectors and their venial scenes, and we are busy ourselves raining moral opprobrium on the poorest and the weakest. Now, the question that we perhaps are confronted with when we turn to this question of, and time and again revisit this question of ecology, security, and sustainability, is that it is this labyrinth of incommensurable practices, the situations which are often found sort of very closely laden with this path that we choose to perhaps think that perhaps this could lead us to just transition to environmental restoration. And that's precisely the moment when we are also in the middle of complete almost seem to be losing our way. And what is then the question that becomes more prominent and significant for us to sort of address is, while it is true that we live in an age of climate change is something that informs and almost sometimes provides a very knee-jerk reaction among scientists, climatologists. For example, one of the recent most that I could think of when I turned to Sundarbans was this one full decade of disasters and cyclones that had actually led the climatologists and scientists to sort of vociferously argue that this place is not suitable for people any longer, and therefore there is almost a WW8 vision plan which suggests that by 2050, if not earlier, that Sundarban, at least 1 million people be guided out of Sundarbans. It's kind of evacuation which would be managed by the state and other similar agencies which do not quite fit the rubric of state and certainly are very much involved in what we understand as today's governance and the way in which governmentality unfolds. That they need to be guided out of Sundarbans because this is a place which is not suitable for them any longer because of incessant environmental disasters, cyclones, so on and so forth. And this then also kind of sets us thinking that while there is this threat of climate change, but is it also that a place like Sundarbans, for example, that whenever we think of this place, that it is the frame of climate and the climate change seems to be governing and informing us, and which is why perhaps we have projects, researches which constantly sort of focus on climate change, people's adaptive capacities, mitigational design. One such mitigational design is what we have come across and being put forward time and again is this idea of a managed retreat, the plan of managed retreat. And this then leaves me wondering that is it that are we also in an age where we are trying to look at problem using climate reductionism as the only way in which problems which are much deeper, problems which are much are something that underlie what appears as knee-jerk climate reaction whenever we think of environmental disaster hotspots such as Sundarbans or the Himalayan regions. And reason why I say this is because this climate reductive argument time and again has clouded our understanding of a particular region such as the Sundarbans. And reason why I keep talking about Sundarbans perhaps is that I'm more familiar with this region and that I have been working in this region for some time now. This whole idea of climate change and climate reductive understanding of a place perhaps does not reveal enough of what this delta could possibly be. And I'm reminded of a book here by Camelia Diwan, who's brought this book in 2023. 2023. which is Misreading the Delta, where she has actually talked about this climate reductive question and brought this as part of her discussion, where she's suggesting that that one of the she argues that the climate change is a kind of an amazing spice that standardizes diverse, disparate, heterogeneous vulnerability experiences and development initiatives into a common recipe for development funding and brokerage. And this is something that she argues in one of her articles and then subsequently in her book, which is born out of her fieldwork in the western coast of Bangladesh, and where she's suggesting that usual consequences of climate crises, such as those that we often come across, melting of ice caps or rising of sea levels, frequency of cyclones, that while simplified narratives may help make development interventions seem related to climate change, adaptation and resilience in order to attract aid and funding, does it accurately capture the causality of floods in complex coastal landscapes, or does it really capture the picture of a place which has a history that goes back in time? And this is actually where I'm trying to also think of the title of her book, which is Misreading the Delta, which was also, kind of inspired by a work which was done many years back by James Fairhead and Melissa Leach in 1995 with respect to with respect to this West African savanna landscape, which is misreading the name of the book was her title was inspired by this work by James Fair and Melissa Leach, which was misreading, which was basically the title I'm trying to figure out, which is the Misreading the African Landscape, Society and Ecology in Forest Savanna Mosaic, which was about this, Kise Dogu's forest in the African savanna located in the west of Africa, which was basically a dense semi-deciduous rainforest, and it was the kind of an allegation that the forests are disappearing under human pressure. It is because of human intervention that the forests are losing their credibility, their natural being, is what led both Melissa Leach and James Fairhead to work on this particular stretch of forest in the savanna landscape, and they kind of came up with that they started with this with these acquisitions, which was that the forest had been lost with past 50 years within the lifetime of region's present inhabitants. And what they are then suggesting rather emphatically is that not all ecologists and foresters and botanists would interpret West Africa's forest savanna mosaic in terms of the past and ongoing forest cover, but all those who have actually examined the mosaic have interpreted in this way. And this is something which needs to be challenged. In some sense, it's also tell us about the Sundarban forest. In some sense, the reason why I brought this here is to also suggest that there is this history of forest, there is this history of a delta, and more importantly, there's this history of cyclone. And if we follow all of these, then there are walks which have often happened around each of these. We know Richard Eaton's work, which goes back in time beyond colonial rule into the forest of Sundarbans, how the forest was cleared, and how a symbiotic relation between agriculture and forest, and an agricultural frontier that opened up not at the cost of the forest, under the Sufi for kids, and which tell us about more about the quotidian tales of people's engagement with forests on an everyday basis, the tales of despair, curiosity, fear, fear, sometimes losing of life, on to the question of the cyclones. I mean, one decade of cyclones, certainly cyclones spell disaster for people in Sundarbans, but it is not as if the cyclones are happening in Sundarbans now. The cyclones did have a history, and if we look at people like Benjamin Kingsbury's work on the imperial disaster, which does not simply talk about the cyclone of 1876, but also a number of cyclones in 1840s, where Benjamin Kingsbury is trying to look at cyclone not simply as a natural disaster, but a kind of a lens that opening up a window into a number of things that had actually unfolded under colonial rule, things that are very significant when we look at a place like Sundarbans beyond its portrayal as a naturally endowed heritage site meant only for wildlife, so on and so forth. But also it kind of tells us about things that often are hidden under immediacy of disasters and the kind of activities that informed soon after the disasters were over. And when we look at a place like Sundarbans, and with this question of sustainability in view, then very often with this particular kind of a discourse of a managed retreat, what we see as sort of what it actually tells us is that either there is a grandeur plan like retreat, or if a disaster strikes, then you have a flurry of relief and aid which is unfolding for a period of time. But what is important is that whether we are in the age of climate change does appear to be a very significant problem. But it is also important to see how climate also provides a kind of a frame with which we look at a number of structural inequities and asymmetries that keep coming, that keep surfacing every time a disaster strikes. And those structures of structural inequities and asymmetries are things which have a life beyond the knee-jerk reaction of climate change. And which is why I sometimes feel that while we live in an age of climate change, but it is also important to sort of look at the different perspectives that emerge. We look at a region using the trope of climate change or the lens of climate change. For example, if we look at Devjani Bhattacharya's book on the path of the city of Kolkata, that which is basically the Ecology Imperial, her book, which came out in 2018. She completely sort of, one can interpret her book as providing a twist in this old tale of change, in the sense in which she tells us about part of the city as solid property market out of a completely different climate, where it is not as if that what we think is most important today is rescuing not simply Sundarban, but perhaps also thinking of rescuing city of Kolkata from from the impending climate disaster. But her book also provides a different twist. You try and understand climate as providing a context to the birth of a city as a certain market, where the nuances of the geography, nuances of the landscape, a very significant role in telling us a different story, and the story that needs to be heard, even when we are preparing ourselves for an action and action that's informed by a reaction to climate change. And this is what perhaps is important, that on the one hand, at one level, which I say sort of today's submission, that on the one hand, we have a host of practices which seem to sort of contradict each other, seem to be paradoxical, even when we have best of intentions about how to achieve and move and sort of achieve a just transition to environmental sustainability. Whereas the people with which we are constantly engaging as anthropologists, as sociologists, and different branches of science are people who are often found sort of deeply implicated in activities which are often found to be in a number of subject positions which are cross-cutting. And on the other hand, we have a place like Sundarbans, which has a deep history of its forest, and a deep history of its settled life on the islands, which all seem to produce a significant landscape where disasters are certainly one of the important entry points, but not certainly the only point with which we begin and end. Because it is also true that a place like Sundarbans, where people have suffered the onslaught of disaster time and again, is also a place where they have kept coming back, returning to. And this has particularly become very, very significant, with which I perhaps end my submission today. It is also very important, and became perhaps very important in 2020s, the year where we had one of the fiercest cyclones that struck not simply Sundarban but Kolkata, Cyclone Amphan. And several years back in 2009, we had the cyclone, which was a kind of an eye-opener that had actually led these climatologists, environmentalists, scientists to argue in favor of a managed and a guided retreat. That people had left Sundarbans, moved to the cities in search of work, different areas of the informal sector that they found themselves engaged. And 2020 was also the time when we had this pandemic struck and the lockdown announced. And the same people who had once left Sundarban in search of safer place, a retreat to higher ground, they found themselves out of their jobs overnight, caught unawares. They were not even aware of, or even they perhaps started to perhaps realize that the life that they led so far was not safer. And overnight they lost their jobs, they were stranded, and the only place that they could perhaps think of was coming back to the place where they once thought that life was not safe, and they had to leave after Ayla. And what is this then that drives people? Yeah, I just one more minute.
Yeah. 3, 4, 5 minutes.
No, I think I'll take less than that. And this is where then the question comes, that what construes as safety, and was the life that they led in the cities of Chennai, Mumbai, in different informal sectors, jewelry shop or this, that, and the other, was any safer? Because many that who had returned had also suggested that we had faced Amphan even before we could settle back into Sundarbans. Yet, Amphan was more familiar than the pandemic, and that which sort of threw them into a complete state of uncertainty, which continued for months before they could come back. And this perhaps also tells us that how people, migrant returnees, think differently of this place, and diversity of people's perceptions of what is safety and what is security. And this would then tell us and kind of leave us wondering as to where we head if we are trying to sort of address the question of sustainability, ecology, and security, not exactly in the order in which CRG had titled it, but how do we understand this? At a level when we are confronted with a myriad of practices which are often contradictory, paradoxical, with subject positions which are very cross-cutting, that you have people who are endowed with their ecological knowledge, wisdom, something that encourages anthropological insight and wisdom. And on the other hand, you have the same people who are often lured into a number of industries, immediate kind of constructions, immediate tourist businesses that grow around them, and the number of other things which I mentioned at the very beginning. And on the other hand, that climate could very well be a point of entry, but not always informed as though we are by a sense of absolute alarm that because this region is struck time and again by cyclones, therefore it is in the interest of the people that this place be left in search of something which is safer, when we do not know what actually safety is, because we are trying to understand, like the climatologists and scientists who argue vociferously for a guided retreat. They think that the best plan and designs are the ones that are informed by scientific precisions and a very chalked out balance sheet and Excel sheet of what is good for people and what is not, and hidden in that is their own implication in their own design, when they are oblivious that they are occupying a moral high ground, and thereby oblivious of reproducing the same hierarchies and asymmetries that they wanted to, or they had once decided to overcome. I think I'll stop here. Professor Samanta, thanks very much to my audience and for suffering this, what might appear to be a complete ramblings and things a bit all over the place. And if it made some sense, I would be grateful for your patient hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Mukhopadhyay. And I would like to thank both the speakers. You have done excellent justice with the concepts which were titled in the webinar. And so I don't have any questions to you directly, but I would like to add to your presentation something. Sohini has done an excellent job in connecting these three concepts and the theoretical positions, where we belong, what kind of changes in the academic discourses are coming up on security question, ecology question, and sustainability question. And she has also given, she has also taken three good examples to cite the challenges, like mountains and rivers and the cities. And if I try to connect the last example of Sohini, which are cities, which are also becoming very difficult places for the marginalized groups or the poor people, then we can easily connect this with Professor Mukhopadhyay's presentation, when Professor Mukhopadhyay is speaking, that if we try to think about, in the way the climate scientists are talking about, or the policymakers are talking about, to take the people out of the vulnerable places like Sundarban and give them a safe place somewhere, then what is that safe place? Then cities are also becoming in a very problematic state for the marginalized groups. Then where they are heading, where we can put these people and find their safe and secure place. And I was thinking that I'm very thankful to Professor Mukhopadhyay for bringing this question of climate change. When we use the climate change, and too much of discourses on climate change are really covering the deeper problems, in which are more structural, social inequities and structural inequities, and we are trying to put everything to climate change as the only problem we are heading in case of sustainability and security and ecology question. So I just would like to add something to it, that I was having a conversation on delta with one of my collaborator who has worked on different deltas of the world. And we were discussing that when we use the term that delta is shrinking, then or sea level rise, when we talk about climate change, we talk about sea level rise, right? And we put this, that sea level rise is becoming a big threat to the deltas. Then the question is, we have to understand, as Professor Mukhopadhyay has already pointed out, we have to understand the delta building process itself. So delta is being built with the enormous silt the rivers carries along their entire catchment areas. But now we have blocked that silt. We have built embankments so that we are not letting even silt to get deposited outside the bank to build the delta. And then we are restricting the silt, we are restricting the delta building process itself. And that's why delta is shrinking, and not because of the sea level rise only. So when we bring the climate change, and I would like to say also that probably during the regime of Junior Bush, the president of America, and the Dick Cheney was the vice president, who changed the narrative with the UN, that rather than global warming, we use the term climate change. So it's kind of taking a little, make the concept dicey, that we are not responsible for the changes. It is something, the climate is changing. But there are some, because we can remember that when this climate change dialogue came up and in the policy discourse, then many people tried to object the idea that climate is changing, because they were claiming that if we consider in a bigger scale, like a geologic scale, then we are in the interglacial period, where this warming is common phenomenon. But afterwards, we have accepted that, yes, there is no other options. But if we think like recent incident of Punjab flood, and I was checking when last time the Punjab receives so much of rain that it can create a flood. And in the 1980s, it has happened to Punjab. And if we consider the climate, then minimum time period for a climate regime to change is 35 years. So within that regime of 35 years, Punjab had that rainfall. Punjab had that flood. But the impact of that flood was not so heavy for two reasons. Because we have changed everything, the landscape in a rigorous way to change the natural systems to work on their own. Simultaneously, we have also forgot that such kind of rainfall can happen anytime. So we have forgot the adaptive capacity to cope with that sudden rainfall, like which comes in the form of a flood, and we have changed all the natural channels, water channels, etc., which can carry that extra water. Similarly, when we talk about Himalayas, Sohini has explained that the livelihood, the development of that livelihood and the adaptive capacities to cope with the situations like drier parts in Rajasthan or in the Himalayas, it took thousands of years of efforts of people to understand that nature and to adapt with that natural system, to develop their own strategies to cope with and to flourish. But here the problem is we are losing that kind of adaptive capacities because we forget how to adapt. We are too much dependent on the outside help or the technology and other things. And simultaneously, we are changing the natural system to a large extent. So I would like to also say here that whenever we are talking about this ecology, security, and sustainability questions, then we have to deal with both the climate crisis and the crisis created by the alteration due to development. So these two things we have to consider, and we have to make sure that climate change doesn't take away all the narratives. So I think I should stop here. I would like to request the participants for the questions to our panelists. I'm sure they have some. So we can go like one question, and then you can address either Sohini or Amitesh, whoever received the question, and then we can go live. So please, Rajat, is there a question in the chat box?
Not yet.
Not yet. So you can speak, you can make your video and audio on, and you can speak. Please. Hello, everyone.
Gopa ma'am, I want to say something.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Make your video on also. Can you
I
make
am
your video on?
No, that would just
Okay.
cut off my connection. I don't have very
Okay,
good
okay,
connection.
okay.
Yeah.
No problem.
So,
No problem.
I have always admired both Sohini and Amitesh sir's presentations, and I just have, I mean, the whatever they spoke about the conceptualization of climate change. I have a question to both. Either of them can answer, or I don't know, whichever way they like. So, how would you teach climate change in the classrooms? Because the narratives have become so much complex these days. So, if you are going to teach climate change in classroom, how are you going to introduce the concept?
Who wants to answer? Sohini or
I think
Yeah.
Sohini had spoken before me. So if Sohini could sort of answer in her own way, then I could follow Sohini in trying to also answer.
Sohini, please.
Sure, no problem. Hi, Devushri. Difficult question to answer. I'm sure Professor Mukhopadhyay will answer it better. I'd have a very, I'm a tough teacher, so I'm going to start by making everybody read all the IPCC reports. So I would make them first read the reports, all the IPCC reports. I'll make them learn all the definitions. And then only I would go into philosophical and critical theory for them to engage with it. But first, I will make them do the hard work. I'll make them read the reports, especially the most recent reports and the earliest reports, just to see how the debate, where it began and where it has come. And I'll make them familiarize with the charts, the graphs, the concepts, the indicators and all of that. That's usually what I do in one of my classes. And then, of course, that would be one part of the class. And in the second part of the class, they would use critical sociological theories and other forms of, depending on what I feel like that particular year, I'm going to ask them to engage with all of these with these concepts and all these indicators more critically, and then of course related to the kind of field situations that they're familiar with, to see to what extent the truth of science can face up with the reality of community existence. Yeah, so yes, Professor Mukhopadhyay, please.
Yeah, wonderful. So I could take the cue from Sohini's way, but I also at the same time I feel that I would fail in Sohini's class. Mm, uh, uh, Now, for me, the questions that are there in nature are basically, for me, are entry points into how we think about nature, and therefore, one of the ways in which one could perhaps, of course, IPCC documents and the basic sort of records that one has to be familiar with, because that's where exactly you start to enter this field of climate change and the rest of it. But what is also important perhaps is to be aware of the larger canvas that you perhaps could paint for students, so that at the end of the course they have more questions than answers perhaps in their mind, because it is very important to raise questions to which, for example, I mean, when I looked at it, this question of the connection between these three, ecology, sustainability, and security, and the things that came to my mind is complete sort of a picture of complete anarchy, where people are have their sacred groves, but people also work in the hotel industry that has grown in their backyard. And therefore, how do you understand this? And still could think of a transition, sustainability, and restoration, which seem to be very important, not just for people, but for the planet Earth, which seems to become a very significant question today. Therefore, there's this planetary crisis, which is actually what is constantly sort of informing us whenever we enter the terrain of climate change and what follows. But certainly, for me, climate change would, having been familiar with the records and the facts and so on and so forth, one would be use climate change as a pretext to sort of enter a reality which is much larger, and therefore should be able to ask a lot more questions than probably having ready answers for them. And if that is done, perhaps I think a teacher's job is done as far as the classroom pedagogy is concerned. Does that answer your question? They will say, I'm not sure.
Yeah, thank you. It does, of course it does. Thank you.
Anybody else? Hello? I don't see any hand raised, so
Dr. Franz Graf has raised his hand.
okay.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful presentations. Both of them, I'm sorry, I'm not able to put on my camera. I don't know how to do it, to be honest. But if you can hear me.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Perfect. Perfect.
Hello, Fran. Are you there?
Hello, can you?
Yeah. Please.
Okay, so I think now I'm sorry for the technical problems. Hello from Vienna. Thank you very much for making this possible to also join in from Vienna and to being able to listen to your great talks, which immediately raised so many issues that I'm also kind of thinking about, and it raised questions that come up from my own fieldwork. Which is based in Central Eastern Europe, in the borderlands between Austria and Hungary, on dealing with issues of 100 years of draining of wetlands on the one hand, and recent projects of rewetting, which are highly contextualized in climate change or the climate catastrophe, and seen as wetlands that has been used for hundreds of years for agriculture, now becoming storage for carbon and also places for biodiversity. And those projects are highly challenged by local farmers and people who work the land. My question would be, but it comes from a specific place where land ownership has so much been historically, but still is in hands of landed nobility, you might say, even if this is something that has changed in the 1918, but in those border regions, the historical situation are very different. So the landed nobility kept their lands until the 60s, and actually still 10% of the whole territory is owned by the noble or former noble family. So issues of agriculture, this family is also the biggest agricultural player in the region, but still it's the small farmers who are mobilized, and the small farmers who show specific voting behaviors, etc. So my question is actually, how do you deal with implicated issues of power, of social power, of land ownership, and of questions that go beyond individuals' decisions, but the power relations behind some of those issues related to climate change. Thank you.
Any of you, I think, can answer? Amitesh or Sohini?
Thanks very much, Franz, for raising this completely sort of born out of your own very individual field work and years of engagement with the particular locale. To sort of answer the question that you actually raise, is the question of power. I mean, that kind of insinuates, it's something that explains many things that you start to discover once you, for example, the region that I had spoken about is the coastal Sundarbans. Is perhaps climate is what takes you there, is the point of entry, but you actually enter the world where it's you have the agricultural communities, very strong landholding people live to the interior of the islands, compared to those who are more found to be on the edges of the embankment, and the ones who go to the forest, work inside, in the narrow creeks, catch crabs, and and the various other forms in which they earn their almost everyday living. So that there is clearly hierarchy, and these hierarchies have been sort of these hierarchies found inscribed, very much when the Indian frontier opened in this particular region, which was for some time outside of the permanent settlement at the very outset of the colonial rule. And yet this was a place which needed to be turned into rice fields. But certainly this history that actually started with colonial rule is not something that could only be traced to colonial rule, but something that goes back in time beyond colonial rule, where there was this opening of this agricultural frontier, and the ways in which the Muslim Ghazis and Peers, the saints, some of them swelled into almost mythical figures, and around which you have a very syncretic kind of a religion that has grown in the region, that it almost is central to the understanding of people's perceptions about forest. But in all of this, certainly power becomes very central. The question as to why people who live on the edges of the island, compared to those who live in deep inside, to the middle interior, and much relatively little safer, is what actually could be explained through recourse to this power dynamics and the equations that unfold in the region, and that which is why, when you see a flurry of aid and relief when the disaster strikes, you tend to ask why does it unfold the way it does, right? That it is always those that even in the times of distress, those are being grabbed by people who are in positions of power. So therefore, that power remains very central to the understanding of what climate change could possibly be, and then what lies beyond climate change. That if you use climate change as a point of entry, then what are you confronted with is a world that is awaiting you, and in terms of its much sort of situated, nuanced power positions, hierarchies, which do not simply center around land, agriculture, but also around things which are, sort of fisheries, fish farming. I mean, there's a distinction between people when they set out to go fishing in the middle of the river or in the Bay of Bengal, is when you actually hunt fish like you hunt other animals. But when you're doing fishing as something of in a fishery in the middle of a village, that is agriculture, and where the land becomes a very significant question. So you actually enter the world of inequities, sort of denial, deprivation, so on and so forth. They are waiting to come to the fore when a disaster strikes. And then we suddenly call that, well, this is a climate, climate struck region. This is a region which has been under climate threat. I do not know if that answers kind of your question, or
Thank
even
you.
comes close to answering that. I'm not sure.
I'll have a go also. Since if that's okay with Professor Samanta.
Yes.
Do we have time?
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Mukhopadhyay. Thank you for this interesting question, Franz. I think the idea, I think you spoke about a kind of a restoration project. You spoke about a restoration project, restoring land to how it used to be, as against how it is used at this point in time. Isn't that? Yeah. So I think if a similar project is attempted in the context of India, for example, whether in the Sundarbans or whether in the Himalayas or any such similar conservation project, there would definitely be two ways in which the power question can be handled. One, of course, is who would uh, who would be who would be creating the the policy frameworks and the measurement processes for this. I mean, there's going to be a massive institutional level uh, power give and take that would happen there. Now, in those networks, usually local communities would not have access. I mean, they might be able to have a lobby who would say that, you have this rewilding, or, I don't know if they want to bring back the grasslands of the Terai region or something. And if they want people to be evacuated from there, they have done that in the past. So it would not be difficult for unless and until they can get their own political representative to have the seat at the table. People who would make the plan, people who would, the planned mountains or the planned deserts or the planned wetlands may not necessarily have any bottom-up processes, in which case people would only be told about the results, the decisions. So land could, in many ways, land use could be changed through a signature from the top. And that is one way in which power can act, state power. I think the other way in which power can act is, of course, in the land itself becomes part of the biotic community. I mean, it's no longer outside. Land is no longer a thing to possess. Land itself has rights, like it is being defined today. Like rivers have rights, or land has rights, or forest, or even I think the clouds have rights in future or something. Even the groundwater has rights. So if land and other abiotic parts of the natural systems can be conferred with rights, and then that itself becomes a stakeholder, then it's a sort of land chooses what it wants itself to be. And I think that's another way in which but here I suppose there would be some communities in the context of India, like Professor Mukhopadhyay spoke about, in the Sundarbans, indigenous communities, tribal people, many other parts where people do recognize such forms of, they share such ethical and epistemological understanding about what land is, and that perhaps that it is not a thing to possess, but it is something which you inhabit more organically. And such projects may find collaborators among the more marginal population, and some ways to make it more democratic, perhaps. Otherwise, in the context of such great inequalities that we have in our country, it is very easy to create a planned project and then impose it on the community, and the community would have to take the risk and fend for themselves. They may not find champions at this point in time. So that's a little scary for
Thank
us.
you very
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
So is there any other question? We have 2-3 minutes, so we can take another question if there is any. Pratabdi, so shall we end here?
Yes, ma'am. I think since there are
No,
no
there is a
questions.
question from Oishika.
Oishika. Okay. Oishika. Please go ahead. This can be the last question. Hello, Oishika.
Oishika has typed a question in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Just let me check. Thank you for the insights. Would love to get your thoughts on any observed new colonial pattern when it comes to the latest so-called development project that are being undertaken and are being planned. For example, the Great Nicobar Island Development Project, perhaps also shedding light on how India's sustainability transition stance and policies fare in the context of such extractive and destructive process. Who wants to answer? Amitesh, Sohini, anyone? Neo-colonial pattern. and the development discourse. Sohini, you want to answer?
I can try. I don't
Yeah,
know if,
yeah.
if Oishika will be
No, no, go.
satisfied with my answer.
No. You go
Yeah.
ahead. Okay.
I think I think from the 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 concept of development and its relationship with modernization and the time when modernization arose, it's inevitable that there will always be in all projects of development appropriation, and all forms of creating economic value involves extraction. So in that sense, many development projects, including the kind of living standards and lifestyles that we have come to see as normal and routine, involves extraction. So your everything from your plastic to your aluminum to your modern transportation, your supply chains, your globalization, all of it is dependent basically on extractive industries. So in that sense, extraction is a new word, but then all of modernization and development are basically extractive. Now, when we look at development only as extractive, then of course we don't see the kind of dreams that development has created, and because of which it still has such a big following, especially in the global south. I mean, if you ask people, citizens from the global south, what would they like their states to do, or what kind of lives would they like to lead, most people are going to obviously say that, we want to lead this kind of life. Maybe they're not making those connections that the leading this kind of life usually has costs, and usually the cost is transferred to people who don't benefit from development. So development has winners and losers, and usually the losers are already people who are lost. So in that sense, development is always extractive. And when we talk about neo-colonialism, I think that's a little bit more difficult for me to engage with at this point in time, because colonialism was a historical phenomenon. And if we are talking about neo-colonialism, then where does it, I mean, I would like to say, where did it begin? Where did it begin? Are we saying that colonialism never ended because we inherited colonial institutions and continued to do the same thing? So in that sense, colonialism never ended. And if you're saying it's a new type of colonialism, then what is so new about it, we would have to specify. But apart from that, what is happening in Andamans is possibly what is happening everywhere else in the country, where something that is remains embedded in community social relationships and other forms of ways of life gets converted and extracted and converted into some kind of an economic value, which would then be sold. So yes, all development is extractive, and so the development or extraction industries or ports or mining or whatever is taking place in the Nicobar Island is exactly part of the same story. It's nothing different. So in that sense, for me, it is not surprising or shocking in that sense. It just seems to be another strand in the same story. But since all of us are complicit in this project of development, do we have a place from which we can stand and say that, we are colonized by this project? In which case, why are we colonized by this project? We don't really have an escape route at this point in time. So point is that we have to, if we want to find a path out of it, then we have to find a non-extractive ways of leading our lives and shaping our communities and societies. And I'm sure young people like you are going to be part of that story.
I thank Sohini for taking the question first, because I got stuck where exactly Sohini raised her finger, that neo-colonial. I was trying to understand what exactly is meant in that particular question, but certainly the other part which Sohini has explained, I would not really add anything further than to suggest that if you simply just give you two quick instances. If you look at 1951 United Nations document for development of the underdeveloped countries, then find that United Nations is saying that a kind of modernist path to be traversed in sort of unlocking all the treasures that are hidden in this part of the world, where it would unfold, and all pockets of unreason have to be burst, basically to allow for that modernity to come into the so-called countries which have been decolonized and got free from the clutches of colonialism. Now, this is 1951, and therefore, caste, kid, community, tribe, everything have to be burst, and exactly 40 years later, when you have this sustainability logic and sustainability rhetoric already in the air, with 72 Stockholm Conference, and then the United Nations Environment Commission for Environment Development, and then Brundtland Report, and following that you had this first Earth Summit in 1991, Rio de Janeiro. Then you have this entire reversal, that it is the wisdom of the local communities, indigenous people, that have to be tapped in order for more, in order for development to sort of unfold and take place in a manner in which it should, and therefore all the wrongs that had been committed need to be sort of erased, as though it could be completely, the histories could be emptied of all its undoings. Now the question is that you wanted to sort of showcase, or you wanted to portray these people who lived in these pockets of unreason as being completely inimical to this progress story. And then 41 years later, you want to basically retrieve them in the way in which you thought that they are all waiting to be retrieved and to be used. This is exactly where the story of development goes, that it's inescapable objectification of its subjects, so to say. And this is extractive. This is development's power in sort of telling us certain things. So even when you have the idea of a bottoms-up development, it has to be told by people who are in, to very literally speaking, in positions of power, and therefore it has to be understood the way it has been designed. And in this very translation, there is this question of power which becomes extractive. The power tries to sort of portray you in a particular way, make you appear to be the way in which they want you to see, to sort of be available. If talking about Andaman, I mean, if you think of this entire stretch, Baratang stretch, when you take the ride through that particular region, you find that the jaws are being sort of, waiting either side of the road with as if they're in the custody of those officials who are part of this private board, etc. And people go through that stage desperately sort of trying to have a glimpse of what the Jarwas look like. Now, this is, I think, is something that tells you why development is also sort of disempowering and sort of extractive.